GOP debate is in the books. A look at the perceived winners and losers. Plus, sitting down with state lawmakers as the stalemate in Springfield continues. We're crossing the aisles to hear from both sides about when a deal could be done. And the economics of eggs, what experts say about how McDonald's could be set up to reshape the ag industry.
Now, from your local election headquarters, this is Central Illinois on the Record.
Welcome to Central Illinois on the Record. I'm Paul Cicchini. We begin with a new congressman in Central Illinois. Darren LaHood is now officially a member of the 114th Congress. He took the oath of office Thursday. LaHood's new office is actually Aaron Schock's old office, the same that went viral for its red walls and Downton Abbey theme. But like all offices before they get a new tenant, it was repainted. As LaHood breaks in his new office, we're hearing from a man who shared that space with Aaron Schock. Our Maria Chandler sat down with Ben Cole, Schock's former communications director. Maria, I understand this was Cole's first on-camera interview since his resignation.
That's right. I spoke with him via satellite from Dallas. He discussed the fallout after racist comments made by him were found on his Facebook page and about how Schock's downfall started with those red office walls. Benjamin Cole says all of this started in December 2014. The move from buildings on Capitol Hill, the start of a new Congress.
Reporters started contacting me because they had heard anecdotally that there was quite a redecoration going on. And at that early point in December, I didn't really respond to those because I didn't know what the office was going to be like.
Just weeks later, that changed. Cole says overseeing the redecorating wasn't in his job description, but answering reporters' questions on who was paying for the overhaul was. He says the financial administrator in the office wouldn't give him the information, so he looked for himself.
I became concerned that individuals responsible for financial accounting, for reporting of office expenditures, for tracking office spending, may not have been doing a great service to the congressman. They may have been careless, sloppy in some of the accounting. And so I was preparing to go to the congressman with some of those concerns. As I look back at it, there was a fog in all that was happening. And so I did contact the congressman and I asked him, I told him that I needed to speak with him about several matters.
It was a one-on-one Cole says he never got.
By the time the Washington Post reporter came to that meeting that we had set up, the office was largely completed, and the eccentric decorator, I really stepped outside her responsibility and exceeded her authority.
But as we all know, that reporter got in and took a lot of pictures. Cole says the pictures were of an office that hadn't gotten the final approval from Schock.
I was aware that the congressman was not pleased with all of it.
In an effort to get the reporter to hold off, Cole promised him an interview with Congressman Schock if he'd wait a few days until Monday. But he says he couldn't get Schock on board.
He made the determination that that was not a priority for him at that moment, and he instructed me to go and tell the reporter that he would not be able to do the interview. And so I did that, and then the rest is history, as they say. So from that point forward, it really became, from Monday and through the remainder of that week, an all-consuming crisis.
We've reached out to Aaron Schock multiple times to get his take and haven't heard back. Paul.
Thanks, Maria. If you want to hear more from Cole, you can head to our website, ciproud.com. The second Republican debate is in the books, and the biggest winner may have been CNN. Nearly 23 million TVs tuned in, making it the most watched program in the network's history. While Donald Trump racked up the most minutes spoken, Senator Marco Rubio tallied the most words. But it was Carly Fiorina who's been praised. Her stance on issues resonated with the crowd, like funding Planned Parenthood.
This is about the character of our nation. And if we will not stand up and force President Obama to veto this bill, shame on us.
Of course, the candidates who didn't get their jabs in have plenty of chances. There are 9 more Republican debates to come. The Democratic candidates will take the debate stage October 13th. Democratic presidential candidate Bernie Sanders venturing into traditionally Republican territory on Monday. The Vermont senator spoke to some 10,000 students during a convocation at the conservative Christian Evangelical Liberty University. Sanders acknowledged he and the students have many differences of opinion, including on issues of gay marriage and abortion. Switching gears to state politics, doctors across Illinois are concerned as reimbursements aren't being paid thanks to the stalemate in Springfield. Delta Dental Insurance was told last week claim payments will be stopped. The Rauner administration says it hasn't had the authority to pay insurance claims since July. Bad news for tens of thousands of state workers. Workers and retirees will continue paying premiums even as the state can't pay providers. Some experts say that could set up a lawsuit from public sector unions.
A lawsuit would be, I paid my premium, you've collected my money, and you're unwilling to pay your side of it.
The more than 200,000 workers and retirees who are fully insured under health care plans will remain unaffected. The insurance companies announced they will pay the state's share of the claims, at least for now. Federal lawmakers are headed back to work this week with the hopes of passing a long-term highway funding bill. Senator Dick Durbin was in the capital city Monday pleading with Congress to pass the Senate's 6-year transportation bill. Illinois gets about $1.5 billion a year for highways, roads, and bridges. Still ahead, we're talking to the experts about how 24-hour breakfast and cage-free eggs at McDonald's will shape the economics of the ag industry. But first, we're sitting down with state lawmakers to talk about the budget stalemate in Springfield. All right, welcome back. Joining me now, Democratic State Senator Dave Koehler. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Paul.
All right, so you're in town last week, no session in Springfield despite the stalemate. So people can understand exactly, Illinois has a part-time legislature. What does that mean, and why aren't you guys there every day hashing out the budget?
Well, one, we don't need to be there every day because really the agreements that need to be made at this point need to take place between the 4 caucus leaders in the legislature and the governor. Unfortunately, and I don't understand this at all, they haven't met since last May. I would think that the governor would want to call people together so that they at least, number one, talk, and then, I mean, if you don't talk, you can't compromise, and that's what we need. We need to come together on this this budget issue. I've never seen a situation like this before.
What are you hearing from your constituents about this budget?
Well, there's a lot of pain being inflicted. I mean, I'm hearing from young mothers who say, "So you want me to go on welfare instead of, you know, paying for my child care support?" You know, we're hearing from seniors. We're hearing from, you know, people that have disabilities that you know are threatened with having those services cut off. People who have children with illnesses. You know, it's just a very painful situation for a lot of families.
So what do you think is the biggest obstacle to getting a budget deal done? I know you mentioned the caucus leaders and the governor speaking, so assume we can get them all in a room.
Well, that's what has to happen first, but here's the issue. We're not that far apart on budget issues. The governor proposed a budget that was about $4.9 billion out of whack in the spring, knowing that we needed new revenues. The Democrats went ahead and passed a budget that was about $4.94 billion out of whack. you know, we can conceivably come together on the budgetary issues and actually have an approach that is going to look at both revenue and some spending cuts and get to where we need to get. The problem is that before the governor will even entertain sitting down and talking about budget, he wants his turnaround agenda passed, which is to eliminate unions, to eliminate prevailing wage, you know, to make all kinds of different cuts that really don't pertain necessarily to the budget. He says they do, but you know, let's deal with these as separate issues. I wish he would you know, take some cues from former governors Edgar and Thompson and understand what governing is about, because we're just at a real crisis point here, and unfortunately it's just inflicting a lot of pain on people unnecessarily.
Obviously you have no control over what's happening in Washington, but the federal government is also staring down a shutdown, and that could in some ways compound the problem here in Illinois.
Oh yeah, yeah, and I think that one thing we always would say before was that, well, at least we're not Washington, D.C. Well, I'm not so sure we can say that anymore. We are just as dysfunctional as Washington, D.C. right now, and it's not a way to run a democracy. We're better than that.
When do you see this stalemate coming to an end?
I don't know. Again, the first step has to be that the leaders and the governor have to meet face to face, and they have to begin to talk about these issues. If that doesn't happen, I see this thing going, you know, until next year.
All right. Well, we'll be interested to stay in touch and hear from you again, hopefully after this issue is resolved. So thank you very much for joining us. Democratic State Senator Dave Kaler. Still ahead, two experts talk McDonald's and how it could reshape the egg industry, what all-day breakfast and cage-free eggs could mean for you. And up next, we go across the aisle and into the State House to speak with Representative Mike Eunice. We'll be right back.
You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
All right, welcome back. Joining me now, Republican State Representative Mike Eunice. Thank you very much for being here.
Good to be with you. Thank you, Paul.
All right, so we were just on the other side of the aisle in the other chamber in Springfield talking to State Senator Kaler, but I want to hear your side of the budget stalemate story. What do you think is the biggest problem to getting this over with?
Well, you know, I think first of all you have to look at how we got here, and it's unfortunate that we're in this situation. It really is. On one side, you have the governor saying, you know, we won't talk about any type of revenue enhancement until we get some of these structural changes that, you know, to try to bring more revenue into the state. And on the other side, you have Mike Madigan saying, you know, don't even dare talk to me about any changes before you talk to me about a tax increase to help alleviate the $5 billion budget that they passed that was out of whack and unconstitutional. And so those two are, quite honestly, unfortunately, on a game of chicken. It's not a healthy environment to be in, and we have to be able to work together and get through this impasse. So, for the first time, I just heard this. For the first time in our state's history, we're going to be ending the first quarter of the fiscal year without a budget. In a state that we were established in 1818, that's a sad state of affairs and not a healthy environment.
Do you think that there's any issue with constitutionally mandating that a balanced budget be passed? Obviously, we don't see that at the federal level. That doesn't have to be balanced. I mean, they put out budgets, obviously. There's a significant deficit, and the state has its own problems, particularly as it comes to pension funding. But could you see a road ahead if it wasn't required to be balanced, or do you think that...
We have to have a balanced budget. I mean, the state, unlike the federal government, we can't print money. I mean, and so there's only so much, you're always going to have those competing interests, but you have to be able to live within your means. And we have so much available, and we have to be able to sit around the table as adults and say, okay, where are our top priorities? Now let's work together, and let's be able to disperse that. But just picking a number out of the sky and say you're helping the most vulnerable when you know in your heart you don't have the money to pay for that, and that's not helping anyone. And that's what's happened for far too long on the other side of the on the other side is you pass a budget that's $5 billion out of whack, and you don't have the money. How does that help the most vulnerable? And so one side will say, well, we have to do this to help the most vulnerable among us. We have to do this. And I would say, I want to help them just as bad as anybody else, but it doesn't help them by not telling the truth. And if the money's not going to be there at the end of the day, that doesn't help anyone. In fact, I would make the argument that does more harm than good, because what you're doing in that situation is you're providing them false hope. You're providing them a situation where they say, hey, we are stable now, we can move forward and we can get on. But that's not helping them, because at the end of the day, that money's not going to be there, and that's not telling the truth. What we need more than anything right now, coming out of Springfield, is truthfulness and honesty. That's what we need more than anything. And, we have to start by, taking baby steps to show that when something is said, people can believe it. And right now, that's not the case, and it's a very sad environment to be in.
All right, well, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out, and hopefully we reach a resolution very soon.
I hope so.
Republican State Representative Mike Eunice, thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks, Paul.
All right, the Federal Reserve passes on an interest rate hike while the central bank balked, and the economics of eggs, what it means for McDonald's to go cage-free and serve breakfast all day.
You're watching Central Illinois on the Record.
All right, welcome back. Joining the panel this week, both from the Illinois Farm Bureau, Mike Doherty, a senior economist and policy analyst, and Jim Fraley, the livestock program director. Thank you both for joining me. All right, so the reason I wanted to have this discussion about eggs in the United States is because McDonald's announces that it's going to serve breakfast all day. They already purchase 2 billion eggs a year. You imagine it's going to at least double, if not triple, given the time frame, and over the next 10 years they're going to phase in cage-free eggs. And I imagine this is going to change the landscape of the egg industry.
Well, it's an interesting dynamic, and I think the big news has been for the last 4 or 5 months is because of the avian flu that killed off half the number of chickens that lay eggs over in Iowa, the #1 egg-producing state in the United States. That took about 10% of our regular supply of eggs out of production. So we've had this decrease in egg supply, and as a result, egg prices have doubled by mid-July. They were more than double and higher than any point in U.S. history almost. And now they're coming back down a little bit. So the concern is if McDonald's goes to maybe doubling the number of eggs that they're using in Egg McMuffins and people consuming them, what does that mean in terms of the fact that we were just starting to see these prices decline from nearly double historical levels?
Yeah, and maybe only doubling, if not tripling, because you imagine just a few hours a day serving breakfast to 24 hours. That's potentially a lot more eggs. So then we come to the idea of how we get these eggs and how egg or chicken farmers have the eggs produced, and whether it's in a cage or cage-free, as McDonald's says it's the direction that it wants to go. There are costs obviously associated with both. What does that look like for somebody who's raising livestock in terms of the demands that are going to be placed on them now?
Right, and what McDonald's has chosen to do over a 10-year period is kind of move toward a cage-free buying system, so that they're buying eggs that are raised in a system where the eggs are laid in cages, maybe, I'm sorry, not in cages, but in an open system. One would call it an aviary system. And this is an opportunity for the chickens to socialize. They're not in 6 to a cage, but maybe 1,000 into one larger room. They can scratch, they can dust, they can socialize. The problem is unfortunately, the science shows that that is not the most economic way to raise eggs, and most importantly, it's not the most animal welfare friendly system out there.
Now that's interesting because I think most people would think if a chicken is stuck in a cage as opposed to being able to walk around on its own, that the latter would be the fair treatment.
We've all heard of the pecking order, and that's true with chickens. That's exactly right. You have a pecking order, whether it's 6 chickens, there'll be the top chicken and the bottom chicken in those 6. And they all have to establish that order. If there's 1,000 chickens in a room, they'll have that top chick and that bottom chick. And what they found, the science showed, is that when they're kind of like teenagers, I say, when you give them more room, they get into more trouble.
Sure.
And so what we've seen is that the mortality, it runs about twice as high in an aviary or open free-range system. And that's because chickens tend to pick on other chickens and peck where there's problems, and as soon as they see some blood, they can't leave it alone. And unfortunately, that's part of the social aspects that chickens have, is they will peck and pick at a chicken until it's dead. And so what we like to see is maybe a smaller system so they can establish that pecking order in less time with less stress to the animal.
So if you're a supplier to McDonald's and you have a cage system for your eggs, and McDonald's wants you to phase that out over time, you have a space that is already established.
Right.
Theoretically, you'd have to knock it down, right? Open it up, which is going to put a cost on the chicken farmer. That cost is certainly going to be passed on to McDonald's, which is certainly going to be passed on to the person who is buying an Egg McMuffin, but it's also going to impact the people who don't buy their eggs from McDonald's and go to the grocery store to get it.
Right.
Do we have any sense of what that's going to mean price-wise. We were just talking about prices going down after the avian flu.
There has been a study on that, and they show with these open aviary systems that there's about a 36% increase in the total cost, both fixed costs, about half increase fixed costs, half of that is increase in operating costs, partly because of the higher mortality rates of these chickens in a group and some other feed efficiency issues and things. So there will be a higher cost of production for those farmers that are signing those contracts to deliver at McDonald's. So to the extent that more and more restaurants and food chains start demanding that their eggs that they receive or buy are cage-free like this or done in these open systems, then yeah, you're going to see there's going to have to be an increase in the price of those eggs.
Is part of the reason that this cage-free egg system then that McDonald's wants is really being phased in over 10 years because it seems like that is going to reduce the burden on the person at the grocery store, the person who waits in the drive-through lane, McDonald's itself, but also those egg suppliers because it's going to be a massive transition.
Right, and in fact, the reason they're phasing that in, I suspect, is because on the part of the increased cost that is overhead cost, the building changeover costs and the systems changeover, that will reduce that part of that cost quite a bit because then there's a cycle to which egg producers have to replace their buildings anyway. So some of them, that's what McDonald's is looking for, is like over the years, as they naturally replace some of their systems in their buildings, they'll replace them with these systems that McDonald's wants. So that part will even out. It's the other side, the operating costs that you cannot get around. Those are going to be higher.
I think it's absolutely fascinating. I think it's going to be really interesting to see how this progresses as time goes on, obviously. Thank you both very much for sitting in with me. All right. Congressman-elect no more. Darren LaHood is officially sworn in on Capitol Hill, and the flu is coming, what the CDC is saying about this year's vaccine. The flu is coming. The head of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention spoke Thursday about the upcoming flu season, along with the importance of being vaccinated. Most years, the flu is in full swing between October and May. While the season is hard to predict, experts at the CDC say this year's vaccine should better protect against the flu. Finally, the Federal Reserve says it will wait for further improvement in the American economy before it raises interest rates. The rate has sat near zero since December 2008. An increase would have impacted home and car loans, savings accounts, and the stock market. That's going to do it for this edition of Central Illinois on the Record. Of course, you can always stay in touch with us using social media. Connect with WMBD and me on Facebook and Twitter. Use the hashtag CIOTR. We'll see you next week.
The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of WMBD, WYZZ, or Nexstar Broadcasting Group.